Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. Today I am very happy to have Guy Windsor. Hi Guy, how are you?
Hi, Manisha. It's nice to see you.
Guy is a good friend, and he is a very important instructor in the field of historical martial arts. And I'm going to give the floor to him. So Guy, please tell us a bit and our viewers about yourself, who you are, what you do, and so on.
Well, my day job is I research medieval and Renaissance Italian swordsmanship systems, and I teach that to my students in lots of different ways. So in a perfect world, i.e. a non-COVID world, I'm traveling about the place giving seminars like any kind of normal martial arts instructor. But fortunately for me, when the COVID situation hit, I already had an established portfolio of books and online courses. So I could kind of sustain my profession sort of through over the internet and via indirect means like books. So I am still a consulting swordsman, thank God, because I really wouldn't want to be anything else. So yeah, I've been into martial arts since as long as I can remember. Like my first formal martial arts class was at the golf club in Gaborone, Botswana in about 1982, when this Korean chap started using the golf club grounds. I'm not sure whether the club itself was aware of this, but he was using the golf club grounds to teach kids Korean karate. And we heard about this and I was like, please can we go, please can we go? So my parents took me to that. And yeah, so I did that for a while. And so basically ever since then, I've been I guess it's fair to say, a martial arts junkie.
Okay, very good. And could you also tell us about your educational background and anything else you would like to share with our viewers, please?
Okay, as to education, are we talking about like formal education or martial arts education? Because
formal education, please.
Formal education, okay. Well, I went to boarding school in England from the age of 8. And when I left school in 1992, I went to Edinburgh University and got an MA in English Lit, which is about as useful as you'd expect, and then went straight into doing antiques restoration and cabinet making, which nobody expected except everyone who actually knows me, because frankly, yeah, I've always been into woodwork as well. The connecting factor there is sharp, shiny blades. But since, well, I was doing sport fencing at school and martial arts in the previous school and Korean karate at the Gaborone Golf Club back in the early 80s. But when I got to university to do English Lit, really it was this fantastic opportunity to do, well, it was fencing on Mondays and Wednesdays, Tai Chi on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Kabuto on Fridays, karate on Saturdays, and on Sundays there was usually some kind of tournament or seminar or something. So really I was doing combat sports or martial arts of some description 7 days a week. And then this chap opened an Aikido class at 8 a.m. on Wednesday mornings, or was it 7? Super early anyway for an arts student. But you know, I couldn't get out of bed for a 9 o'clock English lecture, but I was there for the Aikido class at some stupidly early hour on a Wednesday morning. So during this time, I also started, with the help of some friends, something called the Dawn Jewelers Society, which is basically a club for people who are mad about swords. And it started out fairly informally as, you know, we discovered these books, we started doing research into historical swordsmanship systems of Europe of like the 17th and 18th centuries. And then we formally founded the club in 1994. And then while I was working as a cabinet maker, I was still sort of helping to run the club and teaching Wednesday nights and what have you. And then I decided to turn professional in 2001, moved to Finland and started my School of European Swordsmanship there in Helsinki, which has now been going for just over 20 years. And it's been my full-time profession that entire time. And then during the whole process of doing the research and constructing workable syllabi for my students, I ended up writing a whole bunch of books. And then my dad read one of them, which was a translation of a late 15th century treatise called De Arte Gladiatoria Dimicandi, which is the art of sword fighting in earnest by Filippo Valli, written sometime around 1480. And he read it, was like, Guy, this is really quite academic. And I was like, yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. he got the sword thing. He hadn't quite twigged it. You should see if Edinburgh, my first degree was in Edinburgh, you should see if Edinburgh should give you a PhD for this sort of thing. And I was like, well, maybe I will. So I contacted Edinburgh University, and they have this process for kind of recognizing PhD level work that is not done within a formal university setting. It's called a PhD by research publications. So I submitted some of my books and a 70-page kind of analysis of the books and description of why they constitute a coherent body of work similar to a PhD. And then that got through the committee, and then we got to the exam, and I had this fantastic examiner, a guy called Professor Jeffrey Forgang, who has done a lot of translations in historical martial arts. And how best to put this? He very politely but firmly ripped me a new one. It was like, oh shit. I was like, oh shit, I failed this. This is never going to work. But they gave me like 2 years to bring my translation work up to scratch. And then, so I did that and was re-examined 2 years later. And maybe it took maybe 2.5 years, 3 years, something like that. So in 2018, I got a PhD from Edinburgh University literally for recreating historical martial arts.
Perfect.
So, well, you asked my education. That kind of, I mean, the real education, I must say, is your, should we say, your honourable opponents doing their best to smack you in the face with a big sharp sword.
Okay.
That's the real education. But the formal education is, school and first degree and then PhD a few years ago.
Excellent. And now your school is, you have your main school where you're back in England.
I don't have a main school here at all.
Oh, okay.
The branch that I originally founded was in Helsinki, and that is still going, like 5 years after I left.
Yes.
And it's even survived the corona epidemic, which is great. I mean, any martial arts school that has a permanent training facility and manages to survive the epidemic, that's doing really well.
Yeah.
So, but while I was running that school, people from other parts of Finland and also from Sweden and Germany and Singapore and other places, they were looking for the kind of systematic and organized instruction that I sort of specialize in. And so they ended up starting their own branches of the school. And when the time came, for various reasons, both personal and professional, it was like, if I don't hand this branch over to the students, they're always, while daddy is still home, the kids are always kids, right?
True.
So basically withdrawing from that branch was actually quite painful because, I built it from nothing and it was successful and it's a kind of second home, and it's, I still have a key to the cell and I still have a sword hanging on the wall because I can go back there anytime, right? Yeah. But I had to kind of withdraw and let them do it. And so then we moved to Ipswich in 2016 in the UK, mostly because my wife's mother wasn't well and this was close enough that we could, make emergency runs to hospitals and things like that. So when we moved here, I very deliberately decided that I don't want to start up a new branch because it's a lot of work. B, I've done that already. C, I've got plenty of branches. I don't need another one. And so rather than sort of teaching like 3 or 4 nights a week and most weekends, I could have the weekday evenings for hanging out with my kids, for instance, helping them with their homework, actually being home. And I would travel to Seattle or Melbourne or wherever to teach. Well, actually, we met in New Zealand, so perfect example.
Yes.
So I just decided that I don't need a local branch, and the trade-off there is I don't have like students that can directly push me like in normal everyday training.
Yes.
But the thing is, to train local students up to that level is going to take years anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And there are plenty of people in other martial arts who can do that. So while I've been here, I have been cross-training in things like classical Japanese jiu-jitsu, and the two instructors there are fantastic, right? Their combined training experience is somewhere around 75 years. And they have this way of putting on a joint lock and your whole body kind of goes right. And so I can get some necessary stimulus there. And then when I travel, I'm surrounded by students with swords, and many of them have like decades of experience, and so they can give me the necessary pushback there. And it kind of forced me also to develop things like online courses and producing more books and whatever. So I have this way of being in touch and continue to be stimulated by the student body.
Okay, Guy, I know that you have published and written many books. Do you know how many books you have written?
It kind of depends how you count it.
Okay.
So, hang on, I've got a shelf there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think it's 11, 12, 14, maybe. But then, like some of them, like I have more than that in terms of like specific Kindle files you can buy on Amazon. Because, for example, when I produced my theory and practice of historical martial arts, I produced like each chapter on a subject like, for example, fencing theory or skill development. Each one of those is a 7,000 to 10,000 word essay on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
And so I published those separately as I was writing the book, which meant I could get feedback from readers, like the sort of people who actually want that kind of book. They'd go and buy it, and then they would review it, or they'd send me an email or whatever to tell me what they liked and what they didn't like. So 7 of those separately published volumes were compiled together with a whole bunch of new stuff on other subjects, like, for example, how to do historical research in historical martial arts, into the book that became the theory and practice. So, I mean, I guess technically it's maybe like 30 separate publications or something like that, but really it's like 13 or 14 books.
Okay, let's go back to manuscripts and manuals you use.
Badly.
Do you use mainly German sources or Italian?
Not at all. Okay, most of my work has been done on Fiore de Liberi, who was Italian, writing in Italian at the end of the 14th century. His book is dated to around 1400, and there are 4 existing manuscripts. Filippo Vadi, Italian, who wrote his manuscript in around 1480, and Rodolfo Capoferro, who published his book in 1610. Those are like the 3 authors I've done the most work on. The thing is, because I grew up in Peru and other places, I could speak Spanish fairly fluently, and that made it easy to learn Italian. And so when I was studying the sources, I had French from school, so I can read French sources. I have Spanish and Italian because I had the Spanish already, and adding the Italian wasn't so hard. I have never studied a Germanic language, so I don't deal with the German sources directly at all, right? And to my mind, as a professional instructor, I ought to be working with the original sources. So I don't teach the German stuff because I'm reliant on other people's interpretations. I'm reliant on translations.
Yeah, of course. It makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the German sources, for some reason, have gotten super popular and are super famous. But actually, when you look at them, the martial art they're representing is sophisticated and beautiful and structured and broad, and it has a huge range of different approaches to various combat scenarios. And it's a complete and beautiful martial art, no question about it. But if you look at the actual presentation of the material, the German manuscripts from the 15th century are all, oh, here's some longsword stuff from this author, and here's some dagger stuff from that author, and here's some mounted combat stuff from that author, and all stuck together in a book, and no one knows who actually created the book itself, this compilation of different people's opinions about various aspects of this particular martial art. And it's actually really hard to approach those sources in a really systematic way. Whereas Fiore, writing in the late 14th, very early 15th century, his system is very, very clearly, this is the art of arms as applied to wrestling, as applied to dagger, as applied to sword out of armor, as applied to sword in armor, sword on horseback, lance on horseback. Oh, I missed out, sorry. Poleaxe and spear in armor on foot, and then lance on horseback, sword on horseback, wrestling on horseback, and then defense on the ground against somebody against a horse. So the organization of the material it's a full century ahead of anything else we see from that period. It is a gloriously brilliant representation of the entire art.
Yes. We have also, I mean, lately, as you know, that we are, I mean, experiencing more and more Spanish sources being detected and interpreted. Destreza. Do you also work with destreza, Spanish destreza?
Well, I mean, the Spanish sources have been around like for a long time, and we've been aware of them for, I don't know, 25 years or so. Thing is, I don't work with them directly because they're very academically written, generally speaking. And Spanish of that period is a nightmare to work with. And frankly, the system itself is, okay, I know that some of my Destreza colleagues may watch this, and I do not mean any disrespect. It's just, it's not my style, right? It's just the approach, and it tends to be very kind of academic and sophisticated and complex and sort of detached. And yeah, it's just not me. I like a bit less math with my sword fighting.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's very sophisticated. You're right,
sure.
it is, sure. Absolutely.
And I'm not suggesting it doesn't work at all. There are famous examples of Spanish rapier doing really, really well. Yeah, it's just, I've never been drawn to those sources the way I'm drawn to the Italian sources. Okay. Which is ironic, given my Spanish, certainly 20 years ago, my Spanish was much better than my Italian.
Okay. Do we have any French sources?
Loads. Oh my God. Like middle of the 15th century, you've got Jeu de l'Ache, which is the only manuscript I'm aware of that is exclusively Poleaxe. So Poleaxe in armor. And it's a fantastic source. It's very complete. I mean, it has a whole section about dealing with left-handers, for example. As you would expect, it's mid-15th century France. And at that time, France was pretty much the most sophisticated nation on earth, except maybe China. And yeah, it's, you know, half of the really famous knights of the 15th century are French, right? Geoffrey de Charny being a famous example. So yeah, we have that. Then there's a sort of, there's not so much going on in the 16th century. If I recall rightly, Henri Saint-Didier's treatise is 16th century. It's been a long time since I've looked at it properly though. And then from the sort of middle of the 17th century onwards, we get a shift in how Europeans are carrying swords. And we go from, hang on, it's better I illustrate. This is a rapier, okay, which is extremely long. Yeah. And round about the middle of the 17th century, we went from this to, one second. No, not that one. Not that one. There's a lot of swords in this house. This one, there we go. I'll just take this is a original from about 1780, something like that.
No.
So you can see that we shifted from the rapier, which is like the quintessential Italian weapon, also Spanish, to the small sword, which is the quintessential French dueling weapon. And because at the time France was the fashionable country, the small sword took over in much of Europe, not all of Europe, but much of Europe. So by the 1700s, most of the fencing treatises we're dealing with are either French small sword written in French or French small sword written in some other language. And I don't know if you can see on the video, but it's a triangular section blade.
Yeah.
Let me hold it up to the camera. It's a triangular section blade.
Yes, I see.
So that it's let's put this down. So okay, so it's actually quite rigid.
It is.
But it's flexible. It's very light, and when that goes in, it just goes through. Right. Yeah. The amount of force required to stick this through a body is about the same as if I was to say, "Oh, Manusha, have a cup of tea."
Yeah.
Right. It's the same. So yeah. It's like, yeah, boom, and it goes. Job done.
Yes.
Right. And then you've got this nasty little triangular section puncture wound.
Yeah.
And because it's triangular, it's difficult to heal. And of course, you know, we're talking about the 18th century. We don't have antibiotics or, you know, advanced surgery. So I mean, people did survive small sword fights, but this is people tend to look down on this a bit as like, oh, it's a bit sort of effeminate or effete. No. This is like a knife fight on steroids.
Yeah.
It is super nasty.
Yes.
Right. But you got to hand it to the French. Right? It's fantastic. It's one of the most fun weapons to fight with of all of them. And yeah, so that sort of originated in France in the 17th century, and because France was fashionable, it spread everywhere, pretty much the way McDonald's spreads everywhere. And you know, particularly with like European sword changes over history, fashion is a massively important driving factor for change. Yeah. People wore the modern sword not because it was better, but because it was fashionable.
That's right.
And then they developed fencing systems that worked with the new material or the new equipment.
Yes.